A tourist mocked the royal guard, but seconds later, he fell completely silent. He was just another face in the crowd. Cargo shorts, loud shirt, GoPro strapped to his chest. The square outside Buckingham Palace was buzzing. Tourists snapping. Photos. Guards standing still as stone. Children giggling behind velvet ropes. But no one saw it coming. No one expected the man to step forward, to make a joke at the guard's expense, to mimic his stance, mock his silence, and shout across the square, "Oi, tin soldier! What happens if I poke ya, huh?" People laughed. Nervously. Others turned. Away. But the guard didn't move. Not a twitch. And then, he did something no one anticipated. The tourist took a final step forward, leaned into the guard's face, and whispered something so cruel, so deeply personal, that even the people behind him stopped filming. The guard remained still. But something in his eyes shifted, and just seconds later, the tourist who had been laughing was completely silent, not gagged, not arrested, but undone. And what followed next changed how thousands saw the royal guard, not as statues, but as men, real men, with stories, with scars, and one of them was about to teach the world a lesson, without saying a single word. His name was Jake Barlow, 26 years old, a loudmouth from Phoenix, Arizona, and proud of it. Jake wasn't new to trouble or attention. His claim to fame was a YouTube channel called Jake Unfiltered, which specialized in trolling the world, as he called it. He made his living through viral stunts, mock pranks, and social commentary that usually involved taunting local customs in foreign countries. Paris? He fake snored during the Louvre tour. Tokyo? He wore a dinosaur costume into a sushi bar. And now, London. This time, Jake had a plan. "Let's find one of those Buckingham bots," he said to the camera that morning, sipping a Red Bull. "See what happens when someone actually talks to them." He didn't come alone. His crew, a cameraman named Tyler and a sound guy named Eli, followed close behind as they approached the palace gates. Jake wore a Union Jack tank top for irony, cargo shorts, and mirrored sunglasses. His energy was high, exaggerated, artificial. He grinned at tourists as they passed. "It's content, bro," he told them. "Relax." Buckingham Palace. That day was calm, regal, and timeless. The sun bounced gently off the iron railings. The square buzzed with school groups and families, and standing at the center of it all, one of Her Majesty's royal guards, unmoving, undisturbed, unbreakable. That's who Jake wanted. Let's go ruin this guy's day. Tyler's camera clicked on. The mic pack lit green. Jake fixed his hair and cracked his knuckles. And then, the performance began. "Greetings from America, pal," he shouted as he approached the rope line. "Heard you were famous for standing still. That true?" No response. "Come on, man. Blink for me. I'm getting bored." Still nothing. "What if I give you a little poke?" The people nearby laughed awkwardly. Some shifted away. Others filmed. Jake fed off it. He started imitating the guard's posture, standing tall, mock saluting, stomping in exaggerated marches. "Look at me, I'm the Queen's tin soldier," he shouted. "Ready to faint at any moment." The guard did not move. But Jake wasn't finished. He took a step closer. Then another, just past the rope line, close enough to smell the polish on the guard's boots. Tyler muttered nervously, "Dude, you sure? You're pushing it." "Trust me," Jake whispered. "This will go viral." And then, he leaned in, just inches from the guard's face. "You ever cry in that funny hat, mate? Ever think about how your life is just standing still, while the rest of us actually live?" The words were sharp. Too sharp. The crowd stopped laughing. A young boy nearby looked up at his father and asked quietly, Why's he being mean to the soldier? Jake didn't hear it, or he didn't care. Because at that moment, he delivered the line he'd rehearsed on the train. Bet your mommy's real proud of her little statue. But the guard? Still unmoved, still silent, still something else. And as Jake turned to wink at the camera, proud of what he thought was a perfect ending, something in the air around him shifted. Not a noise, not a threat, just the weight of a presence. And what Jake didn't know was that the man he just mocked wasn't some anonymous performer in a costume. He was someone with a history, mission, and a secret that was about to surface, one that would make Jake's words collapse under the gravity of a truth he could never have prepared for. Jake grinned at the camera, still basking in the imaginary applause of his future view count. Tyler gave a half-hearted chuckle behind the lens. Even Eli, usually the silent sound guy, looked uneasy. But Jake? He was still riding the wave. "That's it for today's episode of British Statues Exposed," he said, pointing his sunglasses toward the crowd. "This lad didn't move, blink, or breathe. So I guess he wins the Lifeless Hero Award." No one laughed. In fact, the people around him were beginning to shift. Not away from Jake, but toward the Royal Guard. They weren't looking at the tourist anymore. They were looking at the man who hadn't moved. There was something haunting about his stillness now. Something deeper. He wasn't ignoring Jake. He was enduring him. Jake turned to walk away. Dramatic, sarcastic. But he paused, because for the first time since the slapstick began, he felt cold. Not a chill, not wind, but something in his chest. A tightening, a quiet realization. The guard had looked at him, just once, not with rage, not with disgust, but with something even more powerful, recognition. And Jake froze. "Wait," he whispered. "Did he just look at me?" Tyler lowered the camera. "Yeah, dude." "He did." Jake turned back slowly. The Royal Guard's eyes were focused, clear, piercing, as if they were reading a book Jake didn't know he was holding. And in that stare, Jake saw something. Not threat, not warning, but loss. For a second, Jake forgot the camera, forgot the crowd, forgot the act, because the man in front of him wasn't a statue. He was a soldier, a human, a man who had likely seen things Jake never would, endured things Jake couldn't handle, and chose, right here, right now, not to flinch. Not because he couldn't, but because he chose to be bigger than the moment. Then the silence was broken. But not by the guard. It was the sound of an older woman's voice from the back of the crowd. "That man saved my grandson." The people turned. She stepped forward, late 60s, modest blouse, clutching a worn purse. "In Kabul, 2010. My grandson's convoy was ambushed. They told me one man pulled him from the burning vehicle. Said he didn't say a word, just dragged him to safety, wrapped his arm, and walked back into the firefight." She pointed to the guard. "That man didn't just stand still. He stood up when others fell." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jake's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence fell heavier now. Not the silence of discipline. The silence of respect. A child stepped forward and saluted. Others lowered their phones. Some clapped, not loudly, not like fans, like mourners, like patriots, like witnesses. Jake lowered his eyes. His breath grew shallow. His pulse climbed, not from embarrassment, from something else. Shame. His voice, once booming with bravado, now trembled. I didn't know." The guard didn't respond. He didn't have to. Because everything Jake thought was power, mocking, speaking, performing, had collapsed in the face of true power. Stillness, service, sacrifice, and in that silence, Jake Barlow, the man who mocked for millions, stood speechless for the first time. The woman in the crowd stood firm. Her name was Margaret Hale, retired nurse, grandmother, British Army widow, and her words had just pierced through the digital ego of Jake Barlow, like a bayonet through bravado. Through bravado. "That man saved my grandson," she repeated, eyes never leaving the guard. "And he didn't ask for thanks. He didn't want attention. He just did it, then disappeared." The crowd leaned in, phones lowered, breaths held. Margaret walked up to the rope line and pointed again, gently, at the man in red. "That's Staff Sergeant Callum Shaw, Royal Army Medical Corps, Afghanistan, 2009 to 2012. Medal of Honor for Valor Under Fire, 3 confirmed rescues. 2 surgeries conducted in-field, 1 without anesthesia." She paused, voice cracking. "And one of those rescues was my grandson, Jamie." Jake blinked hard. The name felt like a slap. "That's not possible," he whispered. "This guy's just a... He couldn't finish. Margaret turned to him. "You thought he was just decoration, just tradition. But that man has done more with one silent act than most do with a lifetime of noise." And then, as if the moment itself demanded it, Palace steward quietly walked to the guard. He didn't touch him, didn't speak. He simply placed a white pin on the guard's lapel, shaped like a laurel leaf, a mark of silent commendation, reserved for those who had been recognized by the Crown for service not disclosed to the public. Jake stared. His voice was gone. He looked back to Tyler and Eli. But they weren't filming anymore. Tyler had turned off the camera. Eli had placed the boom mic down. Even they knew. This moment wasn't content, it was consequence. And then the second wave hit. From the edge of the crowd, another voice. Younger this time. "I know who he is too." A teenage boy stepped forward holding a folded paper. "My school did a project on British heroes. His story was one of them, except it was classified at first. We only found it because it was declassified last year." He opened the paper. Inside was a photo, blurry, grainy, black and white. A younger Callum Shaw. No bearskin hat. No ceremonial rifle. Just combat gear, crouched beside a wounded child in a bombed-out building. The boy read aloud. He volunteered to stay behind during an ambush evacuation and carried 2 wounded men 2 kilometers through enemy fire. He was hit in the leg, refused morphine, bandaged himself, and went back. Jake stepped back. The words hit harder than any comment section ever could. He looked again at the man he mocked, and for the first time he didn't see a costume. He saw a tombstone of memory, a monument in motion, a man who had already bled in silence, and still chose to serve in it. And then, in a gesture no one saw coming, the guard blinked just once. Then, slowly, he raised his left hand and gave Jake a subtle, silent salute, not mocking, not dramatic, but merciful. Jake collapsed to his knees. No one laughed. No one clapped, because in that moment, with no words exchanged, the entire crowd understood something unshakable. Sometimes, the loudest thing a man can do is choose silence. Jake didn't speak for the rest of the day. After the guards and subtle salute, that quiet act of grace that crushed him harder than any backlash. He stood up slowly, turned off his mic, and walked away from Buckingham Palace without saying a word. No sign-off, no smash that like button, no outro, music. The footage never made it to YouTube. Tyler and Eli didn't post it. Jake didn't even ask. He didn't have to. Because that moment, that exact beat of silence between him and Staff Sergeant Callum Shaw, wasn't his to monetize. It wasn't a punchline. It wasn't viral bait. It was a reckoning, and Jake knew it. The internet still caught the story, through others. Tourists uploaded shaky phone clips. Someone posted the photo of the guard saluting Jake as he stood there stunned, knees buckling beneath him. It spread, and when reporters tried to trace the footage back to Jake's channel, they found it wiped clean. Every video, every prank, every challenge he'd filmed. Gone. His bio now read one line: taking time to learn the meaning of silence. It was mocked at first, memmed, clipped out of context. But then, it resonated because 2 days later, a letter appeared at the Royal Guard headquarters. Handwritten, formal, sent by courier. It was addressed to Sergeant Callum Shaw. It read, "You taught me that stillness is not weakness, that silence is not surrender, and that some men stand still not because they're afraid to act, but because they've already done the hardest thing there is. You gave me more than forgiveness. You gave me perspective. I mocked what I didn't understand. Now I walk in the shadow of that understanding every day." Jake Barlow. Attached was a check. $25,000 funds redirected from sponsorship. Deals Jake had never claimed. Marked for a Veterans Trauma Foundation. Anonymous. No public post. No press release. Just impact. And elsewhere. A letter made its way to Windsor. It came with no fanfare, no email pitch. Just a private envelope, sealed in wax. Inside was a transcript of Margaret Hale's testimony, the teenage boy's research page, and a proposal that Sergeant Callum Shaw be officially recognized for his combat service and for his extraordinary restraint in the face of public provocation. The Queen read it in silence, and then, according to a palace source, she stood, walked to the window, and whispered something very few had ever heard from her. Sometimes it takes a child to act out, for a man to remind the world how strength is truly measured. And then she signed the commendation. Staff. Sergeant Callum Shaw would receive the Royal Medal for Public Conduct, the first ever awarded to a silent act. 6 months later, London, early morning. The air crisp, the square calm. Tourists trickled in, whispering more than chatting. The guard stood at his post, unmoving, unblinking, unbroken, but just past the edge of the velvet rope stood a man, clean-shaven. Dressed, simply. No camera crew, no fanfare. He wore a navy blue jacket and held nothing in his hands. It was Jake Barlow. He didn't cross the barrier, didn't call out, didn't perform. He simply stood, watching the same royal guard he once mocked. Nay, with a look of humility so deep it silenced even the birds. And then, something small happened. Sergeant Shaw turned. Not much, not protocol-breaking, just a subtle tilt of his head, barely perceptible, but enough. Enough to be a gesture of acknowledgement. A man who had once saved lives in silence was now changing. Them the same way. Jake nodded. Once, then turned to leave. But before he stepped away, a young girl tugged on his coat. "Are you the guy from the video?" she asked. Jake hesitated. "I used to be." "Did the guard really forgive you?" Jake looked back toward Shaw. "He didn't have to. He reminded me what forgiveness looks like." The girl smiled, then gave the guard a small salute. Jake watched, quietly, and for the first time in years he didn't reach for a phone, didn't record it, didn't narrate, he just let it be because he finally understood that not every moment needs to be captured. Some are meant to be honored. Narrator's closing words. Jake came to London to make noise, but he left, learning the power of stillness. The royal guard he mocked never shouted, never struck back, never spoke. And yet, in his silence, he gave a masterclass in restraint, in dignity, in what it means to carry pain with pride. Not all heroes wear capes, some wear red, and they don't need to move to shake the world around them.